Imagine you're at a market somewhere in West Africa. The sun is doing its absolute best to cook you alive, vendors are shouting over each other, and the smell of spices, smoke, and something unidentifiable is hanging in the air like a warm blanket you didn't ask for. You're walking past stalls piled high with roots, powders, dried things that may or may not still be alive, and then you stop. There's a jar, pale yellowish, almost creamy looking, sitting there like it owns the place. You ask the vendor what it is. She smiles, says two words, and suddenly you're holding a container of something called hyena butter. And you think, hyena? Like the animal? The one that laughs? The one from The Lion King that everyone hated? That hyena? Yes, that hyena. Now, before you put the jar down and slowly back away, hear me out. Because what's inside that container has a history so layered, so strange, so wildly misunderstood, that once you actually understand it, you'll never look at the word butter the same way again. This is one of those rabbit holes that starts with a weird name and ends with you questioning everything you thought you knew about traditional medicine, animal byproducts, and the deeply human desire to find something, anything, that makes life a little more bearable. So, what is hyena butter really? Let's start with what it is not, because the name is doing a lot of heavy lifting and almost none of it is accurate. Hyena butter is not churned. It has nothing to do with dairy. No one milked a hyena. If you even suggested that to a hyena, it would look at you with those unsettling eyes, laugh in that way that sounds like a haunted house, and then make a decision about your future that you would regret. Hyenas are not dairy animals. They are apex scavengers with jaw strength that can crush bone like it's a cracker. Milking one is not on the menu. What hyena butter actually refers to, and this is where things get genuinely interesting, is a fatty substance rendered from the fat deposits of hyenas, primarily the spotted hyena, which is the species most commonly associated with this product across sub-Saharan Africa and parts of North Africa. When hyena fat is rendered down, meaning slowly melted and clarified, it produces a thick, pale, greasy substance that at certain temperatures takes on a semi-solid consistency, a butter-like consistency, hence the name. The hyena didn't choose that name, humans did. And honestly, calling it butter was the smartest marketing move anyone could have made for a product that would otherwise be described as melted wild carnivore fat. The geography of this stuff matters enormously. Hyena butter is not some fringe curiosity found in one tiny corner of the world. Variations of it, or the practice of using hyena-derived fat for medicinal and cosmetic purposes, show up across an enormous swath of Africa and into parts of the Middle East. In Ethiopia, in Sudan, in Nigeria, in parts of the Sahel region, in Morocco, in Somalia. There's a thread of traditional knowledge connecting all of these places that says, essentially, hyena fat does something. Different communities have different names for it, different methods of preparing it, different applications, but the core idea recurs so often across so many unconnected cultures that you have to at least raise an eyebrow and wonder why. Because here's the thing about traditional knowledge. It doesn't survive for centuries by accident. People in pre-industrial societies didn't have the luxury of using something that didn't work. If a remedy was useless, it got dropped. Resources were too scarce, time was too precious, and failure had real consequences. So when a practice persists across generations, across geographic distances, across cultures that never had direct contact with each other, that's a signal. It doesn't mean the practice is scientifically validated, but it does mean it was doing something that people found valuable enough to keep passing down. So what were people using hyena butter for? The applications fall into a few broad categories. The first and most prominent is pain relief, specifically for musculoskeletal issues. Joint pain, arthritis, stiff muscles, lower back problems, conditions that affect physical mobility and quality of life. In many traditional healing systems across Africa, hyena butter is applied topically by massaging it into affected areas, sometimes with heat applied over the top to drive the substance deeper into the tissue. This isn't so different structurally from how many modern topical analgesics are used, a carrier substance that allows for massage and heat penetration, targeting inflamed or painful areas. The second major category is skin. Hyena butter has been used for everything from treating cracked skin on the feet and hands, to managing certain rashes and inflammatory skin conditions, to moisturizing dry or damaged areas. Some communities use it specifically after burns or wounds as part of the healing process. Others use it as a protective coating against harsh environmental conditions, desert heat, cold, wind, all of which do a number on exposed skin over time. Third, and this is where things get more culturally complex, there are uses that fall under the broad umbrella of traditional medicine that goes beyond the physical. In some communities, hyena fat is believed to carry protective or spiritual properties. This is not unusual for an animal as symbolically loaded as the hyena. In many African cultural traditions, the hyena occupies a unique position. It's associated with the night, with transformation, with boundaries between worlds. It's a creature that eats what others leave behind, that survives where others would perish, that operates according to its own internal logic, completely indifferent to human categories of clean or unclean. An animal like that accumulates symbolic weight, and substances derived from animals with that kind of symbolic weight tend to be treated as powerful by the cultures that interact with them. But here's where the story gets more layered, because the hyena isn't just symbolically powerful in African traditions. In ancient Mediterranean and Middle Eastern traditions, the hyena had a reputation for something that made it genuinely fascinating to early naturalists. It was believed to change sex. This belief, documented by figures like Aristotle and Pliny the Elder, held that hyenas alternated between male and female across successive years. It's biologically inaccurate. Spotted hyenas don't change sex, though the females do have remarkably masculinized anatomy due to extremely high androgen levels during development, which likely gave rise to this belief. But the point is that the hyena was, for millennia, associated with transformation and dual nature. In that context, fat derived from such an animal would naturally be seen as carrying some of that transformative energy. Now, you are probably sitting there thinking one of two things. Either you're deeply fascinated and already looking up where to buy this stuff, or you're recoiling slightly and wondering if this is going to circle back to something that sounds more like folklore than anything else. Both reactions are valid. Hold them, because the actual scientific picture is more nuanced than either extreme. Here's what we know from a biological standpoint. Hyenas, as obligate carnivores and scavengers, have a fat composition that is somewhat different from herbivore fat. The fatty acid profiles of carnivore fats tend to lean more towards certain types of saturated and monounsaturated fats, and depending on what the animal has been eating, there may be concentrations of various bioactive compounds present. Carnivore fat in general tends to have some interesting properties. It's stable, resistant to rancidity in certain conditions, and has historically been used as an ointment base in various medical traditions because of how it interacts with skin. The question is whether hyena fat specifically does something that other animal fats don't. And honestly, the peer-reviewed research on this exact question is frustratingly sparse. Not because scientists believe it's useless, but because hyena-derived products haven't been a priority for the major research institutions that fund these kinds of studies. Traditional medicine from sub-Saharan Africa has been chronically underfunded when it comes to scientific validation. This is a genuine gap in the literature, and it matters. What has been studied more broadly is the concept of traditional topical animal fats in general. Research on bear fat, crocodile fat, emu oil, and other animal-derived topicals suggests that certain fats do have measurable anti-inflammatory properties, do serve as effective carriers for other compounds, and do support certain aspects of skin barrier function. This doesn't automatically transfer to hyena fat, but it provides a plausible mechanism for why it might work. Not magic, just biochemistry. There's also the question of what's in hyena butter that isn't just fat. Depending on the method of preparation, hyena butter as sold or used traditionally might contain other ingredients. In some preparations, it's combined with plant materials, with other animal products, with minerals, creating a compound remedy where the fat serves as the carrier, and other ingredients provide active effects. When you're evaluating a traditional medicine, you have to evaluate the whole thing, not just the most exotic sounding component. Now let's pause for a second and address the elephant, or rather the hyena, in the room. The ethics of this. Spotted hyenas are not endangered. They're listed as least concern by the IUCN, with a population estimated in the tens of thousands. But not endangered and completely fine with being hunted for their fat are different things. In many countries where hyena butter is used or traded, there are wildlife protection laws that complicate the legal status of products derived from wild hyenas. The enforcement of these laws varies enormously. In some urban traditional medicine markets, you will find products labeled as hyena-derived that are, upon closer inspection, either mislabeled or of uncertain origin. This is not unique to hyena butter. The traditional medicine trade globally has serious issues with mislabeling and substitution. There are also communities where hyenas are considered a pest species, where they prey on livestock and create conflict with human settlement. In those contexts, the use of hyena-derived products is entangled with broader questions about human-wildlife conflict and livelihood. These are not simple situations, and any honest conversation about hyena butter has to acknowledge that the supply chain is complicated in in ways that don't lend themselves to easy moral verdicts. What's worth noting, though, is that in many of the communities where this tradition is most entrenched, the hyena is not viewed as something to be casually destroyed. The knowledge about how to prepare hyena butter, how to use it, what it's for, that knowledge exists within a worldview that treats the animal as something powerful and consequential. That's not the same as conservation in the modern scientific sense, but it's also not cavalier disregard for the creature. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content, covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Okay, back to the practical question that's probably been hovering in your mind since the beginning of this. Does it work? For joint pain and muscle soreness, the primary use case, there are plausible reasons to think that something is happening when people apply hyena butter. Topical fat-based applications provide lubrication of the skin, reduce friction during massage, allow sustained manual pressure to be applied to sore areas, and may provide mild warmth through occlusion. The physical act of massaging a substance into a painful joint does measurably help with certain types of pain, independent of whatever the substance itself is doing pharmacologically. This is not nothing. This is the kind of effect that drives placebo-controlled trials crazy, because even the act of application can be therapeutic. But beyond the mechanical effects of massage, is there something specific about hyena fat that makes it better than, say, coconut oil or shea butter for these purposes? Here's the brutally honest answer. We don't fully know yet. There are enough anecdotal reports across enough cultures and enough centuries to make it implausible that nothing is happening. There are also enough gaps in the research to make confident scientific claims premature. Where you land on that spectrum depends somewhat on your prior relationship with traditional knowledge versus peer-reviewed evidence. And honestly, you're allowed to hold the uncertainty without resolving it. For skin applications, the case is slightly stronger, simply because we have more general evidence about animal fat as a topical agent. The heavy, stable fats in rendered animal products are genuinely effective at forming an occlusive barrier on skin, which is the mechanism behind their use on cracked, dry, or damaged areas. Think of lanolin. It's sheep-derived fat, used in everything from lip balm to breastfeeding creams, and it works because of exactly this mechanism. Hyena fat could plausibly work similarly, with the caveat that the source animal is considerably more dramatic. Something worth exploring, because most coverage of this topic skips right past it. What does the process of making hyena butter actually look like? Because knowing the process tells you a lot about the product. Traditional preparation involves rendering the fat from harvested hyena tissue, typically from the fat deposits around the organs and under the skin. The fat is slowly heated, not rapidly boiled, to melt it down while preserving its useful compounds. Impurities and connective tissue are removed. The clarified fat is then allowed to cool, at which point it solidifies into that semi-solid, pale, buttery consistency that gives it its name. Some preparations stop there. Others add botanicals, roots, bark, dried plant materials during the rendering process so that plant compounds infuse into the fat as it cools. The result is a compound preparation where hyena fat is the base, but the active therapeutic load may come in part from the plants. This is actually a sophisticated approach to pharmaceutical compounding, even if it's not being conducted in a lab with sterile equipment. The concept of a fat-based carrier for active plant compounds is well established in modern pharmacology. Many commercially sold balms and salves use a similar logic, a fat or wax base that helps other compounds penetrate and remain on the skin. If you have been wondering whether you can buy this, the answer is yes, you can, in various forms, and with varying degrees of certainty about what you're actually getting. In large cities in West and East Africa, hyena butter is sold openly in traditional medicine markets. It's also found online, though sourcing and authenticity become significant concerns the further you get from the communities where it's produced. Products sold online as hyena butter may be exactly what they claim, maybe a substitute fat with similar properties, or maybe something else entirely with creative labeling. This is the kind of thing where the supply chain transparency problem really bites. If you're in a context where you can directly verify the source and preparation, meaning you're buying from a practitioner within a community where this knowledge is actively practiced, you're in a much better epistemic position than if you're purchasing something from an unverified seller online. Now, one more dimension of this that doesn't get nearly enough attention: the economics. Hyena butter exists within a traditional medicine economy that supports livelihoods. The people who harvest, prepare, and sell this product are operating within a system of knowledge that often represents family heritage spanning multiple generations. There's a practitioner class, healers, herbalists, traders, whose expertise and income depend on this tradition continuing to be valued. When outside observers dismiss traditional medicine wholesale, they're not just expressing a scientific opinion. They're participating in an economic and cultural devaluation that has real effects on real people. Conversely, when traditional medicine is appropriated, rebranded, and sold back to its source communities at a markup after some minimal scientific validation, that's also a problem. Both of these failure modes have historical precedent. The ideal, which is easier to describe than to achieve, is an approach where traditional knowledge is respected as knowledge, where communities benefit when their practices are validated or commercialized, and where scientific investigation serves as a tool for understanding rather than a gatekeeper for legitimacy. Hyena butter sits in the middle of all of this. It's been practiced for centuries. It's embedded in living cultural traditions. It operates at the intersection of ecology, economics, medicine, and symbolism. And it's named after an animal that most people associate with a Disney villain, which is an absolutely spectacular PR problem that has nothing to do with whether the substance works. Let's talk about the hyena itself for a moment, because the animal deserves more than a footnote in a story it's literally at the center of. Spotted hyenas are extraordinary animals. They're matriarchal. Females dominate male hyenas socially, which is rare among large social mammals. The females are larger and more aggressive. Their social structure is complex, with strict hierarchies and sophisticated communication. They're not just scavengers, they're highly effective hunters who kill the majority of their own food. The scavenger reputation is largely lion propaganda. Lions actually steal from hyenas more often than the reverse, but lions are charismatic megafauna with better press. Hyena vocalizations, the whoop, the giggle, the whine, are a complex communication system that conveys identity, rank, and emotional state. The laugh isn't mirth, it's a submissive or excitement vocalization that sounds, to human ears, deeply unsettling, which has contributed to centuries of negative cultural association. They're misunderstood in ways that are almost poetic in their thoroughness. The fact that a creature this ecologically important, this behaviorally complex, this symbolically loaded across multiple cultures has also given its name to a fatty topical preparation used for joint pain. And dry skin is the kind of thing that could only happen through the messy, wonderful, non-linear process of human beings trying to make sense of and use the world around them. Here's where all of this lands. Hyena butter is a rendered animal fat with centuries of use across multiple African and North African cultures, primarily applied for musculoskeletal pain and skin conditions. Its scientific validation is incomplete, not because it's been studied and found lacking, but because it hasn't been studied with the rigor it arguably deserves. Its supply chain is complicated by wildlife laws, by the informal economy of traditional medicine, and by the inevitable authenticity questions that arise when traditional products enter global markets. The animal it comes from is one of the most ecologically significant and culturally misrepresented mammals in Africa. And honestly, the fact that it's called butter is doing more for its memorability than any marketing team could have engineered. Whether you're fascinated by traditional medicine, curious about the biochemistry of animal fats, interested in how cultural knowledge persists across generations, or just stumbled into this because you heard the name and could not let it go, you've now arrived somewhere that most people never reach. You know what hyena butter actually is. You know the nuance. You know the gaps in the knowledge and why they exist. You know the animal behind the name and why it's been carrying that name across centuries and cultures. The jar at that market stall isn't mysterious anymore. It's complicated, and complicated is so much more interesting than mysterious because mystery is just a temporary state before understanding, and understanding is what you actually came here for. That vendor was right to smile when you asked, because the answer to what is this is never one sentence. It's never just the label. It's always the whole thing. The animal, the land, the people, the knowledge, the history, the gaps, the questions still waiting for answers. And hyena butter, it's all of that in a pale, semi-solid jar sitting on a table in the sun.